Hello, and welcome back to Story Times with Shini. I am your host, Shini. We will be continuing today reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Silmarillion. But before that, a few small announcements-questions, I suppose. 1. If I was to do a second series, would you prefer it to be another story, or something shorter, maybe like poetry, or something like that, or heck, kids' books? I'd be willing to read some of those. It'd be kind of interesting. If I have any viewers, please let me know. But until then, I will continue reading The Silmarillion. If I don't hear back within a week about something, I'll just come up with something. Anyway, we were at Chapter 2, which is of Aule and Yavanna. It is told that in the beginning the dwarves were made by Aule in the darkness of Middle-earth. For so greatly did Aule desire the coming of the children, to have learners to whom he could teach his lore and his crafts, that he was unwilling to await the fulfillment of the designs of Ilúvatar. And Aule made the dwarves even as they still are, because the forms of the children who were to come were unclear to his mind, and because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth, and he wished therefore that they should be strong and unyielding. But fearing that the other Valar might blame his work, he wrought in secret, and he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves in a hall under the mountain in Middle-earth. Now Ilúvatar knew what was done, and in the very hour that Aule work was completed, and he was pleased, and began to instruct the dwarves in the speech that he had devised for them, Ilúvatar spoke to him, and Aule heard his voice and was silent. And the voice of Ilúvatar said to him, Why hast thou done this? Why dost thou attempt a thing which thou knowest is beyond thy power and thy authority? For thou hast from me as a gift thy own being only, and no more, and therefore the creatures of thy hand and mine can live only by that being, moving when thou thinkest to move them, and if thou thought be elsewhere, standing idle. Is that thy desire? Then Aule answered, I did not desire such lordship. I desired things other than I am, to love and to teach them, so that they too might perceive the beauty of Ea, which thou hast caused to be. For it seemed to me that there is great room in Arda for many things that might rejoice in it, yet it is for the most part empty still, and dumb. And in my impatience I have fallen into folly. Yet the making of things is in my heart for my own making by thee, and the child of little understanding that makes a play of the deeds of his father may do so without thought of mockery, but because he is the son of his father. And what shall I do now, so that thou be not angry with me forever? As a child to his father I offer to thee these things, the works of the hands which thou hast made. Do with them what thou wilt. But should I not rather destroy the works of my presumption? Then Aule took up a great hammer to smite the dwarfs, and he wept. But Ilúvatar had compassion upon Aule and his desire, because of his humility. And the dwarves shrank from the hammer and were afraid, and they bowed down their heads and begged for mercy. And the voice of Ilúvatar said to Aule, Thy offer I accepted even as it was made. Dost thou not see that these things have now a life of their own, and speak with their own voices? Else they would not have flinched from thy blow, nor from any command of thy will. Then Aule cast down his hammer and was glad, and he gave thanks to Ilúvatar, saying, May Eru bless my work and amend it. But Ilúvatar spoke again, and said, Even as I gave being to the thoughts of the Ainur at the beginning of the world, so now I have taken up thine desire, and given to it a place therein. But in no other way will I amend thy handiwork, and as thou hast made it, so shall it be. But I will not suffer this, that these should come before the firstborn of my design, nor that thy impatience should be rewarded. They shall sleep now in the darkness under stone, and shall not come forth until the firstborn have awakened upon earth, and until that time thou and they shall wait, though long it seem. But when the time comes, I will awaken them, and they shall be to thee as children, and often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption and the children of my choice. Then Aule took the 7 fathers of the dwarves, and laid them to rest in far sundered places, and he returned to Valinor, and waited while the long years lengthened. Since they were to come in the days of the power of Melkor, Iule made the dwarves strong to endure. Therefore they are stone-hard, stubborn, fast in friendship and enmity, and they suffer toil and hunger and hurt of body more heartily than all other speaking peoples. And they live long, far beyond the span of men, yet not forever. Aftermore it was held among the elves in Middle-earth that dying the dwarves returned to the earth and the stone of which they were made. Yet that is not their own belief, for they say that Iule the Maker, whom they call Mahal, cares for them, and gathers them to Mandos in halls set apart, and that he declared to their fathers of old that Ilúvatar will hallow them, and give them a place among the children in the end. Then their part shall be to serve Iule, and to aid him in the remaking of Arda after the last battle. They say also that the 7 fathers of the dwarves return to live again in their own kin, and to bear once more their ancient names, of whom Durin was the most renowned in after ages, father of that kindred most friendly to the elves, whose mansions were at Khazad-dûm. Now when Iule laboured in the making of the dwarves, he kept this work hidden from the other Valar, but at last he opened his mind to Yavanna, and told her of all that had come to pass. Then Yavanna said to him, Eru is merciful. Now I see that thy heart rejoiceth, as indeed it may, for thou hast received not only forgiveness, but bounty. Yet because thou hidest this thought from me until its achievement, thy children will have little love for the things of my love. They will love first the things made by their own hands, as does their father. They will delve in the earth, and the things that grow and live upon the earth they will not heed. Many a tree shall feel the bite of their iron without pity. And Iule answered, That shall also be true of the children of Ilúvatar, for they will eat and they will build, and though the things of thy realm have worth in themselves, and would have worth if no children were to come, yet Eru will give them dominion, and they shall use all that they find in Arda, though not by the purpose of Eru, without respect or without gratitude. Not lest Melkor darkens their hearts, said Yavanna, and she was not appeased, but grieved in heart, fearing what might be done upon Middle-earth in days to come. Therefore she went before Manwë, and she did not betray the counsel of Iule, but she said, King of Arda, is it true, as Iule hath said to me, that the children, when they come, shall have dominion over all the things of my labour, to do as they will therewith? It is true, said Manwë. But why dost thou ask? For thou hast no need of the teachings of Iule. Then Yavanna was silent and looked into her own thoughts. And she answered, Because my heart is anxious, thinking of the days to come. All my works are dear to me. It is not enough that Melkor should have marred so many. Shall nothing that I have devised be free from the dominion of others? If thou hast thy will, what wouldst thou reserve? Said Manwë. Of all thy realm, what dost thou hold dearest? All have their worth, said Yavanna, and each contributes to the worth of the others. But the Kelvar can flee or defend themselves, whereas the Olvar that grow cannot. And among these I hold trees dear. Long in the growing, swift shall they be in the felling, and unless they pay toll with fruit upon bough, little mourned in their passing. So I see in my thought, would that the trees might speak on behalf of all things that have roots, and punish those that wrong them. That is a strange thought, said Manwë. Yet it was in the song, said Yavanna. For while thou wert in the heavens, and with Ulmo built the clouds and poured out the rains, I lifted up the branches of great trees to receive them, and some sang to Ilúvatar amid the wind and the rain. Then Manwë sat silent, and the thought of Yavanna that she had put into his heart grew and unfolded, and it was beheld by Ilúvatar. Then it seemed to Manwë that the song rose once more about him, and he heeded now many things therein that though he had heard them he had not heeded before. And at last the vision was renewed, but it was not now remote, for he was himself within it. And yet he saw that all was upheld by the hand of Ilúvatar, and the hand entered in, and from it came forth many wonders that had until then been hidden from him in the hearts of the Ainur. Then Manwë awoke, and he went down to Yavanna upon Ezelhohar, and he sat beside her beneath the two trees. And Manwë said, O Kemetari, Eru hath spoken, saying, Do then any of the Valar suppose that I did not hear all the song, even the least sound of the least voice? Behold, when the children awaken, then the thought of Yavanna will awake also, and it will summon spirits from afar, and they will go among the Kelvar and the Olvar, and some will dwell therein, and be held in reverence, and their just anger shall be feared, for a time, while the firstborn are in their power, and while the secondborn are young. But dost thou not now remember, Kementari, that thy thought song not always alone? Did not thy thought and mine meet also, so that we took wing together like great birds that soar above the clouds, that also shall come to be by the heed of Ilvatar? And before the children awake, there shall go forth with wings like the wind the eagles of the lords of the west. Then Yavanna was glad, and she stood up, reaching her arms toward the heavens, and said, I shall climb the trees of Kementari, like that the eagles of the king may house therein. But Manwë rose also, and it seemed that he stood to such a height that his voice came down to Yavanna as from the paths of the winds. Nay, he said, only the trees of Aiule will be tall enough. In the mountains the eagles shall house, and hear the voices of those who call upon us. But in the forest shall walk the shepherds of the trees. Then Manwë and Yavanna parted for that time, and Yavanna returned to Aiule, and he was in his smithy, pouring molten metal into a mold. Eru is bountiful, she said. Now let thy children beware, for there shall walk a power in the forest whose wrath they will arouse at their peril. Nonetheless, they will have need of wood, said Aiule, and he went on with his smith work. That was Chapter 2. Now for Chapter 3, of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. Also, please note, I will not be doing the voices again. I thought I'd try it for this chapter, and oh god, I regret that decision. But it's in there, so enjoy them. Through long ages the Valar dwelt in bliss in the lights of the trees beyond the mountains of Aman, but all Middle-earth lay in a twilight under the stars. While the lamps had shone, growth began there which now was checked, and because all was again dark. But already the oldest living things had arisen, in the seas the great weeds, and on earth the shadow of great trees, and in the valleys of the night-clad hills there were dark creatures old and strong. To those lands and forests the Valar seldom came, save only Yavanna and Orome. And Yavanna would walk there in the shadows, grieving because the growth and promise of the spring of Arda was stayed. And she sat asleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but should wait for a time of awakening that yet should be. But in the north Melkar built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored. And the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters in shapes of dread. And in Utumno he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and the terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days, and in that dark time Melkor bred many of the monsters of divers shapes and kinds that long troubled the world, and his realm spread now ever southward over Middle-earth. And Melkor made also a fortress and armory not far from the northwestern shores of the sea, to resist any assault that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband. It came to pass that the Valar held council, for they became troubled by the tidings that Yavanna and Orome brought from the outer lands. And Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, Ye mighty of Arda, the vision of Ilvatar was brief and soon taken away, so that maybe we cannot guess that within a narrow count of days the hour appointed. Yet be sure of this, the hour approaches, and within this age our hope shall be revealed, and the children shall awake. Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they walk in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwë sits upon Taniquintil? And Tokos cried, Nay! Let us make war swiftly. Have we not resisted strife over long, and is not our strength now renewed? Shall one alone contest with us forever? But at the bidding of Manwë, Mandos spoke, and he said, In this age the children of Ilúvatar shall come indeed, but they come not yet. Moreover, it is doomed that the firstborn shall come in the darkness, and shall look upon the stars. Great light shall be for their waning. To Varda ever shall they call it need. Then Varda went forth from the council, and she looked out from the height of Taniquintil, and beheld the darkness of Middle-earth beneath the innumerable stars, faint and far. Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda. She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion, and therewith she made new stars, and brighter against the coming of for the firstborn. Wherefore she whose name out of the depths of time and the labours of Ea was Tintele, the kindler, was called after by the elves Elentari, queen of the stars, Carnil and Luinnil, Nanar and Lumbar, Alcarinki and Elmimir. She wrought in that time, and many other of the ancient stars she gathered together, and set as signs in the heavens of Arda, Wilwarin, Telemendril, Soranume, and Anarimi. And Melimaskar was his shining belt, that forebodes the last battle that shall be at the end of days. And high in the north, as a challenge to Melkar, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars to swing, Valar's Circa, the sickle of the Valar, and sign of doom. It is told that even as Varda ended her labors, and they were long, when first Menel Makar strode up the sky, and the blue fire of Helion flickered in the mists above the borders of the world, in that hour the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Ilúvatar. But by the starlit mere of Cúvain, water of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Ilúvatar, and while they dwelt yet silent by Cúvain, their eyes beheld first of all the things the stars of heaven. Therefore they have ever loved the starlight, and revered Varda Elentari above all the Valar. In the changes of the world, the shapes of lands and of seas have been broken and remade. Rivers have not kept their courses, neither have mountains remained steadfast. And to Cúvain there is no returning. But it is said among the elves that it lay far off in the east of Middle-earth, and northward. It was a bay in the inland sea of Helkar, and that sea stood where aforetime the roots of the mountain of Ilúin had been before Melkor overthrew it. Many waters flowed down thither from heights in the east, and the first sound that was heard by the elves was the sound of water flowing, and the sound of water falling over stone. Long they dwelt in their first home by the water under stars, and they walked the earth in wonder, and they began to make speech and to give names to all things that they perceived. Themselves they named the Quandi, signifying that they speak with voices, for as yet they had met no other living things that spoke or sang. And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastward in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar, and passed under the shadows of the Orkarni, the mountains of the east. Then on a sudden Nehar set up a great neighing and stood still, and Orome wondered and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in the quiet of the land under the stars he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had so long awaited, and Orome looking upon the elves was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvellous and unforeseen. For it shall ever be with the Valar. For so it shall ever be with the Valar. For without the world, though all things may be forethought in music or foreshown and envisioned from afar, To those who enter verily into Ea, each of it in its time shall be met as unawares as something new and unforetold. In the beginning, the elder children of Ilvatar were stronger and greater than they have since become, but not more fair, for though the beauty of the Quindi in the days of their youth was beyond all the beauty that Ilvatar had caused to be, it has not perished, but lives in the west, and sorrow and wisdom have enriched it. And Orome loved the Quindi, and named them in their own tongue Eldar, the people of the stars. But that name was after borne only by those who followed him upon the westward road. Yet many of the Quindi were filled with dread at his coming, and this was the doing of Melkor. For by after knowledge the wise declare that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the awakening of the Quindi, and sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them and waylay them. So it came to pass, some years ere the coming of Orome, that if any of the elves strayed far abroad, alone or few together, they would often vanish and never return. And the Quindi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were afraid. And indeed the most ancient songs of the elves, of which echoes are remembered still in the west, tell of the shadow shapes that walked in the hills above Cuvien, or would pass suddenly over the stars, and of the dark rider upon his wild horse that pursued those that wandered to take them and devour them. Now Melkor greatly hated and feared the riding of Orome, and either he sent indeed his dark servants as riders, or he sent lying whisperers abroad, for the purpose that the Quindi should shun Orome, if ever they should meet. Thus it was that when Nahar neighed and Orome indeed came among them, some of the Quindi hid themselves, and some fled and were lost. But those that had courage and stayed perceived swiftly that the great rider was no shape out of darkness, for the light of Aman was in his face, and all the noblest of the elves were drawn towards it. But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pit of Utumno, or has explored the darkness of the counsels of Melkor? Yet this is held true by the wise of Eressa, that all those of the Quindi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, and of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Nulindale before the beginning, and so say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the Orc loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Ilvatar. Orome tarried a while among the Quindi, and then swiftly he rode back over land and sea to Valinor, and brought the tidings to Valmar, and he spoke of the shadows that troubled Cuvien. Then the Valar rejoiced, and yet they were in doubt amid their joy, and they debated long what counsel in were best to take for the guarding of the Quindi from the shadow of Melkor. But Orome returned at once to Middle-earth, and abode with the elves. Manwë sat long in thought upon Tonquintil, and he sought the counsel of Ilvatar, and coming then down to Valmar he summoned the Valar to the Ring of Doom, and thither came even Ulmo from the outer sea. Then Manwë said to the Valar, "This is the counsel of Ilvatar in my heart, that we should take up again the mastery of Arda, at whatsoever cost, and deliver the Quindi from the shadow of Melkor." Then Tulkas was glad, but Iule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come of that strife. But the Valar made ready, and came forth from Aman in strength of war, resolving to assault the fortresses of Melkor and make an end. Never did Melkor forget that this war was made for the sake of the elves, and that they were the cause of his downfall. Yet they had no part in those deeds, and they know little of the riding of the might of the west against the north in the beginning of the days. Melkor met the onset of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much broken. But the first victory of the hosts of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Utumno. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuvien, and thereafter the Quindi knew nothing of the great battles of the powers, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters were moved, and in the north there were lights as of mighty fires. Long and grievous was the siege of Utumno, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but the rumour is known to the elves. In that time the shape of Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and deep, and had broken it upon the coasts and made a deep gulf to the southward. Many lesser bays were made between the great gulf and Helcarex, far in the north, where Middle-earth and Aman came nigh together. Of those the Bay of Balar was the chief, and into it the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new raised highlands northward. Dorthonion, and the mountains from about Hithlum. The lands of the far north were all made desolate in those days. From there Utumno was delved exceeding deep, and its pits were filled with fires, and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor. But at the last the gates of Utumno were broken, and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the utmost pit. Then Tulkas stood forth as champion of the Valar, and wrestled with him, and cast him upon his face, and he was bound with the chain Engunor that Aule had wrought, and led captive, and the world had peace for a long age. None the less the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Utumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark, and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour, and Sauron they did not find. But when the battle was ended, and from the ruin of the north great clouds arose and hid the stars, the Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot and blindfold, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom. There he lay upon his face before the feet of Manwë, and sued for pardon, but his prayer was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. Vast and strong are those halls, and they were built in the west of the land of Aman. There was Melkor doomed to abide for 3 ages long, for his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. Then again the Valar were gathered in council, and they were divided in debate. For some, and of those Ulmo was the chief, held that the Quindi should be left free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, and with their gifts of skill to order all the lands and heal their hurts. But the most part feared for the Quindi in the dangerous world amid the deceits of the starlit dusk, and they were filled moreover with the love of the beauty of the elves, and desired their fellowship. At the last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quindi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers and light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed." From this summons came many woes that afterwards befell. But the elves were at first unwilling to hearken to the summons, for they had as yet seen Valar only in their wrath as they went to war, save Orome alone, and they were filled with dread. Therefore Orome was sent again to them, and he chose from among them ambassadors who should go to Valinor and speak for their people. And they were Ingwe, Finwë, and Elwë, who afterwards were kings. And coming they were filled with awe by the glory and majesty of the Valar, and desired greatly the light and the splendor of the trees. Then Orome brought them back to Cuvien, and they spoke before their people, and counselled them to heed the summons of the Valar, and remove into the west. Then befell the first sundering of the elves, for the kindred of Ingwe, and the most part of the kindreds of Finwë and Elwë, were swayed by the words of their lords, and were willing to depart and follow Orome, and those were known ever after as the Eldar, by the name that Orome gave to the elves in the beginning, in their own tongue. But many refused the summons, preferring the starlight in the wide spaces of Middle-earth to the rumour of the trees, and those are the Avari, the unwilling. And they were sundered in that time from the Eldar, and met never again until many ages were past. The Eldar prepared now a great march from their first homes in the east, and they were arrayed in 3 hosts. The smallest host and the first to set forth was led by Ingwe, the most high lord of all the elvish race. He entered into Valinor and sits at the feet of the powers, and all elves revere his name. But he came never back, nor looked again upon Middle-earth. The Vanyar were his people. They are the fair elves, the beloved of Manwë and Varda, and few among men have spoken with them. Next came the Noldor, a name of wisdom, the people of Finwë. They are the deep elves, the friends of Aule, and they are renowned in song, for they fought and labored long and grievously in the northern lands of old. The greatest host came last, and they are named the Teleri, for they tarried on the road, and were not wholly of a mind to pass from the dusk to the light of Valinor. In water they had great delight, and those that came at last to the western shores were enamoured of the sea. The sea elves, therefore, they became in the land of Aman, the Falmari, for they made music beside the breaking waves. 2 lords they had, for their numbers were great, Elwë Singolo, which signifies grey mantle, and Olwë his brother. These were the 3 kindreds of the Eldali, who passing at length into the utmost west in the days of the trees are called the Kalakindi, elves of the light. But others of the Eldar there were who set out indeed upon the westward march, but became lost upon the long road, or turned aside, or lingered on the shores of Middle-earth, and these were for the most part of the kindred of the Teleri, as is told hereafter. They dwelt by the sea, or wandered in the woods and mountains of the world, yet their hearts were turned towards the west. Those elves the Kalakindi call the Umanyar, since they came never to the land of Aman and the blessed realm. But the Umanyar and the Avari alike they call the Morinkindi, elves of the darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. It is told that when the hosts of the Eldari departed from Cuvian, Orome rode at the head upon Nahar, his white horse shod with gold. And passing northward about the sea of Helkar, they turned towards the west. Before them great clouds hung still black in the north, above the ruins of war, and the stars in that region were hidden. Then not a few grew afraid and repented, and turned back, and are forgotten. Long and slow was the march of the Eldar into the west, for the leagues of Middle-earth were uncounted, and weary and pathless. Nor did the Eldar desire to hasten, for they were filled with wonder at all that they saw, and by many lands and rivers they wished to abide, and though all were yet willing to wander, many feared rather their journey's end than hoped for it. Therefore, when Orome departed, having at times other matters to heed, they halted and went forward no more, until he returned to guide them. And it came to pass after many years of journeying in this manner, that the Eldar took their course through a forest, and they came to a great river, wider than any they had yet seen, and beyond it were mountains whose sharp horns seemed to pierce the realm of the stars. This river, it is said, was even the river which was after called Anduin the Great, and was ever the frontier of the westlands of Middle-earth. But the mountains were the Hithaglir, the towers of mist upon the borders of Eridor, yet they were taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. Now the Teleri abode long on the east bank of that river, and wished to remain there, but the Vanyar and the Noldor passed over it, and Orome led them into the passes of the mountains. And when Orome was gone forward, the Teleri looked upon the shadowy heights, and were afraid. Then one arose in the host of Olwë, which was ever the hindmost on the road. Lenwë he was called. He forsook the westward march, and led away a numerous people, southwards down the great river, and they passed out of the knowledge of their kin until long years were past. Those were the Nandor, and they became a people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water, and dwelt most beside falls and running streams. Greater knowledge they had of living things, tree and herb, bird and beast, than all other elves. In after years Denethor, son of Lenwë, turned again west at last, and led a part of that people over the mountains into Beleriand ere the rising of the moon. At last the Vanyar and the Noldor came over Erendlun, the Blue Mountains, between Eredor and the westernmost land of Middle-earth, which the elves have after named Beleriand. And the foremost companies passed over the Vale of Sirion, and came down to the shores of the great sea between Drengst and the Bay of Balar. But when they beheld it, great fear came upon them, and many withdrew into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Then Orome departed, and returned to Valinor to seek the counsel of Manwë, and left them. And the host of the Teleri passed over the misty mountains, and crossed the wide lands of Eredor, being urged on by Elwë Singolo, for he was eager to return to Valinor and the light that he had beheld. And he wished not to be sundered from the Noldor, for he had great friendship with Finwë their lord. Thus after many years the Teleri also came at last over Erendlun into the eastern regions of Beleriand. There they halted, and dwelt a while beyond the river Gelion. That was Chapter 2 and 3 of the Silmarillion. Next time will be Chapter 4. Please again, comment, like, whatever, the video, if you view it. Which would probably just be me making sure everything sounds good, but what do I care? I'm doing this more to have fun than anything else. But if you do watch, thank you for watching, and thank you for sticking out with me for over half an hour. Again, if there are people watching these, please comment maybe what else you'd like me to read, or send me a Twitter or whatever it is that you want to send me. Because while I'm going to finish the Silmarillion, no matter how long it takes, I don't want you to be all completely bored with this. I would like you guys to enjoy what I do. So please, recommend some stuff, or just vote for either more stories, or like something like poetry, or kid stories. Those are the three options right now. Anyways, thanks for listening.